Hello and welcome to this episode of Lutra TV. Today I'm speaking with Gillian Blythe, CEO of Water New Zealand. In this episode we're going to be talking about transition, where we're currently at, and some of the challenges or questions that need to be answered as we go into this. So perhaps to kick off, Gillian, do you want to give us a bit of a view on where you think the transition in the local water done well is at the moment and what is coming for the next 12 to 18 months?
So all the councils, just perhaps to go back a bit, all the councils last year submitted their water service delivery plans, identifying who or what mechanism they were going to use to deliver water.
Yes.
So on my reckoning, we've got 19 CCOs being formed between late last year, so late 2025 and the 1st of July 2027.
Yes.
I think we've therefore got 22 councils that have elected to have internal business units.
Yes.
So in this period between, if we split it between we're in early February and the end of June, we've got TRQI, which is the Wellington Water, CCO being set up, EOI, which is Hamilton and Waikato, and Waikato District Council being set up. Selwyn Water was set up before Christmas. Waikato Water is the fourth one, which is being set up with 3 of their 6 councils coming together by 1 July this year, 2026. And obviously Watercare is already in existence. So you've got at the moment a range of boards being announced and establishment directors or program directors being announced and CE appointments, either happening or in the process of happening. And so that's something that's really, I guess, at that governance level in terms of creating those structures is happening. What I think we're also seeing in the council business units is that they will be going, what does that actually mean?
Yes.
How am I going to demonstrate that I have got the appropriate ring fencing in place and the appropriate governance in place within my council? And I suspect in the same way with any business, whether you're a CCO or an internal business unit, you're going to do a number of things for a number of months, working out whether things work. And if they don't, you'll need to pivot, and make some various changes.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of a view that I share to a degree where I guess while we're in this formation stage, there is going to be that kind of settling. So again, in some of these cases, they are setting up entirely new organisations, they're putting in their management structures. There'll be people who haven't worked together before, so there is going to be that kind of settling period of those teams and understanding their processes, their systems, what they can transfer over. And then I think from there, they can actually start moving to that transformation stage. And I think even it's probably worth not underestimating even the change with those internal business units in terms of the splitting, maybe the physical relocation within an office to again highlight those teams being split. And then also looking at where you have those kind of shared services and shared agreements where you might have staff who were doing more than one role and then how that kind of interacts under this new world and then where those shared services agreements come in. I guess sticking with the CCOs for a minute, I guess when we look at those kind of governance structures and those boards being formed, with that, how do you think the accountability is going to shift or that landscape's going to develop as we move away from maybe councillors making some of those end directions to now moving over to professional boards?
I think there's probably a variety of things that we're going to see happen. I mean, as professional boards, there's personal liability.
Yes.
Councillors, even under the Water Services Act, don't have personal liability if there are breaches of the regulations and rules. So I think that personal liability lens will change things. And I think what's going to happen is the asset management plans that have underpinned water services delivery for decades are going to be looked at, and they're going to be, someone's going to ask those questions. Well, why have we got that priority? So if we characterize things in terms of we make investments to address compliance, levels of service, resilience, growth, and renewals, across those 5 buckets, water service managers around the country have made decisions based on the budgets that they were given by their councils as to what goes in those buckets. Now, I suspect over time, you're going to see more put into a compliance budget because of those personal liability, but also maybe we will see some investments that might have been in year 12 of a plan brought forward. And those sorts of things will reflect different perspectives of risk.
Yes.
Which is what anybody new coming in looks at something and goes, do I agree with that decision making, that prioritisation? And I think when you've got, potentially a board of directors of 8 people who are coming in, who are reflecting on their previous experiences, they're going to ask questions, why?
Yes.
I wouldn't have done that. Surely we should have done the other. And that's just natural.
Yeah, and I think probably with that, I kind of agree with that in terms of you'd move to probably more of a risk-based framework, particularly in the early stages, just to understand, I guess, particularly as a new board member coming into an organisation, you want to understand where your risks lie and where things are likely to fall over. So then you put the appropriate investment in there. And so I think probably the way I kind of visualise it is that maybe for that 1 to 3 years, it'll be very much an investment. We focus on reducing risk, as you say, that kind of compliance angle, to really shore up what assets they have, ensure that they know, the status of them and where their biggest risks lie and how they might mitigate that. And then I think from there, as those kind of teams also settle, that's where you might then see some optimization type work in that kind of year 3 point. Just as we start seeing, I guess, the board and also the staff becoming more comfortable with the assets that they now carry. Just sticking with the board side of things, and I've read some media around this, particularly through institute directors. In terms of the board placements, do you think we have enough board members, professional board members in New Zealand to actually fill these boards?
Well, one of the reasons that I think you've seen Institute of Directors talking about this is that a number of us, I'm a chartered member of the Institute, have raised the whole question of, if we were to end up with 30 CCOs, we've ended up with 19, that 30 times 8 directors was going to be a lot. And so absolutely that is going to be a challenge. And so one of the things that the Institute of Directors has been doing over the last 18 months is to lift the lid on the opportunity.
Yes.
But also wanting to make sure that directors are going in with their eyes open. That this is an essential service.
Yes.
It is something that all of us, we all drink glasses of water, and we all want to know it's safe. We obviously want to make sure that the wastewater and stormwater are managed appropriately as well. Yes. And it is something that is going to be on the front page of the newspaper. Whether it's your local newspaper or whether it's, Radio New Zealand or TVNZ or whatever.
Yes.
It's not something we're going to be able to hide from.
Yeah. No, I guess I agree with that. And I think partially in terms of the original formation of the reform as well, in terms of Three Waters reform and some of the negative stigma that was generated around that and how it became a bit of political football, I think that's also not going to help, particularly as these CCOs have stood up, because there's already, I guess, a preconceived idea about what these are and some of the challenges around this and that. So particularly, I think from a consumer level, there will be probably more eyes on, and particularly media as well, on whether these organisations will stand up and be successful or whether they have those initial kind of teething issues and failures. I think linking into that as well, I guess some of the directors I've heard from some of the board of directors that have been stood up is that they want that kind of zero-based or zero tolerance for non-compliances from day one. So I guess maybe what's your thoughts on that based on what you know about the asset base in New Zealand and particularly with some of these CCOs being stood up in 1 July this year? Do you think that's achievable? Are we setting ourselves up for failure in terms of that messaging? What's your thoughts on that?
I think in terms of the objective of full compliance with all rules and regulations is a tough ask.
Yes.
We've got across particularly wastewater treatment plants, we've got a whole, there's a range of non-compliances.
Yes.
And I don't think they're going to be solved through quick fixes.
Yes.
And so I think assuming, we could pick a date in the diary and say, right, I want to be fully compliant by that date. And I just think it's probably not possible.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you can't agree a transition from the current state to a compliant state over a number of months and years to get there and be transparent with your community and with the regulator, so regional councils in terms of resource consents, with that. And just in the same way as if we go back to the letters that Te Mata Arawai, the Water Services Authority, sent in October 23 of saying to various councils, you need to get your protozoa barrier in place, or you need to get your bacteria barrier or your chlorine or whatever the particular letter was to the particular council, of going, I'm going to give you a deadline. Let's see your plan to get there. And so I would expect as a director, to say, okay, let's understand the level of non-compliance. Is it simply because I haven't collected the data? And is the data collectible straightforwardly? Yes, let's fix it. If it's something that requires an equipment, fix, which might be, something that can't happen overnight, then I think it's about being realistic and being able to communicate, manage the expectations of the regulator, as well as manage the expectations of the community.
Yeah, and I guess this probably comes back down to that, once you understand that risk matrix and you have the mitigations in place, I mean, maybe this actually adds on to your water safety plan or your wastewater safety plan in terms of that sense where you do acknowledge these risks exist, you acknowledge where there might be gaps and then what those mitigations are there to protect against them, whether that in a water sense is additional sampling, additional monitoring, things like this, whilst you get those upgrades. Because I think then it leads in probably an interesting question about investment as well. So again, when you're looking at maybe like a multi-CCO structure, and let's just pick a figure, let's say Waikato Water, they have 6 member councils coming in. Let's say they have a budget in year 1 of 200 million or something like this. Now, each of those councils potentially are going to say, actually, I need 100 million spent on my district because I have these challenges or these issues or these growth problems. And then I think this is probably going to come back to that board of directors, be like, how do you manage that risk, potentially manage an investment profile where you might be putting more money from that pot into a single district, and then how do you manage that, I guess, that political aspect of those shareholders as to why you're doing that. And I think it's probably all got to come back to some formulaic type approach where you are actually saying, we're doing this because of this, and we're mitigating this and that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays in and how that actually feeds into, like say, that planning around water safety, wastewater safety, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think each of those councils are going to be providing or wanting to feed into a statement of expectations. I mean, I would hope, and I don't know the constitution of Waikato Water enough to be able to comment about their specifics, but of going that they get one statement of expectations, which all the councils have fed into, because then you're dealing with one, the shareholder council. And I would expect there needs to be a conversation around how do I balance those different 5 buckets that I talked about earlier, and being able to do trade-offs. But I think it's one of those things of being able to go, let's not just focus on year 1, let's focus on 10 years. What needs to happen over those 10 years such that you can demonstrate that you're not playing favourites.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think probably switching tack a little bit now, and maybe going up to the internal business units a little bit here as well. So one thing that's been acknowledged throughout the industry is we've got a staff shortage in a couple of areas. So I think the numbers that I've seen floating around is we're about 6,000 to 8,000 people short, or that's what's going to be needed for the industry. I think the other piece that is worrying as well is that particularly in the operators field, we've got a lot of operations teams who are approaching that retirement age. So again, they're at that upper age bracket and potentially be looking to leave the industry. I guess, where do you see some challenges maybe from an internal business unit versus one of these multi-CCOs around, I guess, attracting and retaining talent initially, and we'll park the getting more talent for another question.
So I think one of the pieces that all of us in the sector need to be conscious of is that we want the water sector to be seen as a career.
Yes.
I mean, many people have fallen into water in terms of their careers as opposed to deliberately made that decision. So part of it is we've got to raise the awareness of water. We've got to then be able to talk about career paths.
Yes.
And I think that's something which, whether you're an internal business unit or a CCO, that we can have that conversation.
Yes.
And, recognising in a council that you might be in the water and then you might be in a road team and you might backwards and forwards. But I think we need to be able to build that career path and create greater awareness. I mean, I'm being asked by engineer graduates for where they can get their internships.
Yes, yes.
So we almost need to think about some sort of hub, where can you all put your respective adverts such that we can try and facilitate that process. And those are some of the things I think we need to think about. I think in terms of the age of workers and the being able to think about an ageing workforce, we've got to think about flexibility. I mean, I go back, my own dad, as he was approaching retirement, he went down to 3 days a week. That was fantastic. He could play golf on the days that he didn't want to be at work. And so it's like, what do we need to do to enable both a good transition into an organisation and a transition out?
Yes.
And those sorts of things I think is going to be, is important.
Yeah. I think also it is looking at similarly how you do that kind of knowledge capture as well. So I like that idea of that flexibility. I think now, particularly post-COVID and things like that, I think people are a lot more open to the idea of that flexibility, not only from the remote working, but also working less hours and things like this to kind of suit that lifestyle. And particularly, like say, if you can then extend someone another couple of years to then pass that knowledge down, that's also a benefit. I think there is probably another aspect there where we do need to look at how we can capture that knowledge in other forms as well, so that if you do have a hard cutover or you have something where there is potentially, disruption because of reform happening and maybe people deciding to leave at that time, how we kind of capture and centralise some of that knowledge. Going back to your point around the graduates and things like that, what do we need to do as a sector, and this is including companies like Lutra and others, what do we need to do as a sector to raise the awareness, and how do we actually attract more talent in here? Because going back to your comment, I think myself, I fell into water by accident. When I talked to a good chunk of our Lutra team, not many of them left university aiming to go into water or wastewater. They either took it as a first university job, or they fell into it through some other opportunity. So what do we need to do as a sector to...
So I think one of the things that we need to be able to do is really focus on what some of the jobs are.
Yes.
I mean, if we're not careful, everyone's going to go out want to be an All Black or a film star. And so one of the things that Water New Zealand did last year was we produced, I think, 14 different career videos, focusing on different roles within the sector. And it's a case of let's share those. Let's make sure that they're available. So we're doing things with CareerWise, which is going into schools to give awareness of these opportunities. We're making sure that they've been translated into Te Reo and I think Samoan and possibly Tongan, as a way of going, let's make sure that we aren't limiting our pool of possible workers. I think we also need to be thinking about the mentor-mentee relationship. So that's, again, something that Water New Zealand is able to facilitate, that someone from Lutra can be mentoring someone from, a completely different organisation or someone who's wanting to join the sector. So I think those sorts of things are a really important piece. And also encouraging, last year at the Water Conference, we had a young water professional pre-conference workshop. I know that the young water professionals are quite keen to do something similar at the September 26 conference. And so it's bringing people together so that you've got that network early in your career such that you can, hopefully be persuaded to stay in water for the rest of your career. And you've got that support group.
And I think that's probably, if I look at it and I compare back to the energy sector, I think this is somewhat exciting through the local water done well and even the prior three waters reform, because again it was looking at getting larger scale organisations, and yes, we're on a bit of a transitionary journey there, but if you think over to the energy sector, you've got the Transpowers, Meridians, things like this, but even at the energy distribution level you've got quite large distributors, so it becomes, and even for me personally, that was more attractive to enter the energy sector because it looked like there was a pathway. So I think even that idea of moving some of these out of councils, maybe forming these larger organisations, I think that also helps promote the industry and lift, the interest level, because you start seeing these bigger organisations.
I think it's also, yes, bigger organisations makes a difference because you're going, well, how many do they employ? 100, 200, 300,000. But I think some of it actually goes down as basic as making sure that people know that water is, how do we get water?
Yes.
That from an electricity perspective, a hydro dam or a Huntly power station are very visible. The pylons are very visible.
Yes.
You walk around our cities, the pipes are underground. We tend to hide our drinking water plants and our wastewater plants.
Yes.
And so things like, what's happened in Hastings in terms of their drinking water plant and making it visible to the public,
Yes.
I think we need to think about those sorts of things. We need to ensure that we are going into those careers fairs, having those conversations with the communities. Even when we get a new bill,
yes.
If I'm going to get from Te Akiwai, so in Wellington from 1 July, a bill from Wellington City Council and a bill from Te Akiwai,
yes.
I need to understand who Te Akiwai is,
yes.
and what do they deliver, such that I help to understand those sorts of things. And
I think that's probably an interesting transition there as well, because and going back to my point earlier around under the Three Waters reform, unfortunately it got very politicised and it attracted a lot of kind of negative media attention. We've all seen the Stop Three Waters signs around the country. Now we're kind of transitioning where this might be the first year where a lot of people receive a water bill for the first time, and it was always otherwise hidden in the rates or kind of not overly visible. And I'd also ask how many people engage with the rates bill. But off the back of that, I'm interested to see what the public sentiment's going to be. And I agree with the kind of commentary there in terms of, prior to entering the water sector, you don't even think about how water gets to your tap or where your wastewater goes. You might think of the plumber who comes and connects it, but you don't think of all the other infrastructure that sits behind it. And like I say, it's not visible. So I think it's going to be an interesting sentiment piece here to see how, as an industry, we manage that, how we introduce and I guess highlight what goes into the production of water, the treatment of wastewater, and then how that relates back to the physical bill that you receive. Because again, I think it's always been one of these things, and it links back to water meters as well, is people don't always value it because it's perceived to be free. And so when you suddenly start charging for that, you will potentially get quite a negative reaction to that. Have you got any thoughts around?
Look, I think it's absolutely, we will need to manage that perception that water's free, therefore why do I need to pay for it? And I think that's when, as a sector, we need to be able to do a really good job of explaining what we do.
Yes.
That's and I would, and I guess if we think about careers paths, I've often thought that it doesn't matter what your academic interest is, there is a job for you in water. Yes. Whether you're in comms or marketing, or engineering or science or whatever, data or whatever. And so those sorts of things, I would think that if I was a comms person, the opportunity to get involved in the water sector and be part of that response and that translation of these new entities or these new arrangements will be quite a fascinating one.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. I guess just kind of looping back, all the way back up to that board of directors level, and I think that public perception, similarly around that, and I quite like that angle you went there with the comms people, but I think just looking at that, again, you're seeing a lot of these bills that are coming out in terms of people saying, we're going to spend this many billion on water over the next few years, and then that translating down to a consumer bill where maybe in the past had a $5,000 rates bill, and now they've got two, which no longer add up to 5,000, they potentially add up to more. I think it's going to be interesting, again, from that CCO, internal business unit, whatever the structure might be, as to how they kind of take that communication off that investment profile all the way down to this is what we do, this is why we need it, and then feeding that all the way back into what we actually get as a deliverable at the other side, which is water to your tap or wastewater gone. So I think it's going to be a bit of an interesting journey in that sense, and I agree with that. The communications and the messaging around that is going to be critical.
Oh, it absolutely will be critical. I think as each entity, whether in-house or CCO, produces their water services strategy and has to consult with consumers, with stakeholders, that is going to be a really important piece to be able to explain. I mean, if we are lifting investment over the next 10 years by 48 billion, give or take, that's a lot of money. That's a significant lift over what has been the traditional expenditure on water. I mean, if you just divide by 10, the idea that we're going to spend practically $5 billion per year is huge compared to we've probably, if you ignore the interceptor in Auckland, was probably more like 1.5, maybe getting close to 2, depending on whether it was COVID incentivized funding or not. And so that's a huge lift.
Yes.
And we need to be able to explain to our communities why that's necessary. We need to be able to explain that, to get on top of renewals of pipes in particular areas, that we're going to have to do a lot of investment and disruption within the roads, or hopefully using more trenchless technologies. So I think that whole ensuring that councils are giving a statement of expectations that is clear, that the entities are following their significant engagement policy arrangements, that's they are sharing their water services strategies with communities and getting feedback. I suspect that many of them will will concentrate on the first year of their water services strategy and give a flavour of the next 9 whilst they get their heads around it.
Once everyone gets settled.
And then we'll see, year 2 and year 3 will be, or the second and third versions of the water services strategy will become more, less fluid.
I guess my final question, and it links a little bit to what you said there on like the trenchless technologies and likes. What is innovation going to look like in the water sector over the next 1 to 5 years, do you think?
I think there's
perhaps even appetite for innovation.
Well, I think if we go, yes, there is probably several levels of answering that. I suspect for those CCOs that are being stood up when they're combining, well, even if you're just taking from one council into a CCO, that's a transformation. And so there will be a desire to, for many, to concentrate on making sure we don't drop the ball. So that, it might be far more of the transition in rather than transition and transform at the same time. So I think, but once we've got past that bit, I think we're going to start to see more transformation because we're going to have pressure on what can we, for that 48 billion, can we do it in a better, cleverer way than we initially thought of? I'm sure that when we start looking at some of the data, I mean, we're going to, likely see far more biosensors in our pipes, in our waterways, giving us information. I think that's going to change things. Things like the asset data standards hopefully will help to transform how we are thinking about our asset management. I think we're going to suddenly, we're bound to suddenly discover that we've got a problem in a particular, whether it's a virus or whether it's something else that we weren't expecting, and we're going to have to solve it. And so I think there is lots of transformation and innovation that's out there. And part of it is about how do we ensure that our procurement processes don't prevent it, that we are open to those sorts of opportunities as we transition towards delivering water in a way that is healthy for people, for the land, and for our waterways.
No, excellent. Hey, look, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been really, really interesting and insightful. And look, if you'd like to learn more about this, feel free to reach out and contact us, or even Gillian at Water New Zealand, and make sure you follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel.